What I really needed was to recreate myself, which means to bring something new into the world that has never existed before.
All right, today I have John Warrillow, the best-selling author of the great book, which is one of my favorite books, Built to Sell. And this is a book about how to create a business that can thrive without you. And I can honestly tell you that this book changed my life, John. But today we're going to be talking about the book, The Art of Selling Your Business, which is winning strategies and secret hacks for exiting on top, which a lot of people have been asking me about selling the business, which is an entirely different language. So welcome, John.
Well, thanks for having me. It's good to be with you.
Great to be with you too. And, one of the things I was given your book, Built to Sell, as a gift from a friend. And in the inside of the book, he wrote me a message. And I opened this book again because I read it a lot. You'll see it's heavily used. It said, "This book has changed my life. Perhaps it'll change yours too." That was from my friend Rob. Thought so much of your system and your philosophy about creating a business that's a real business. And people have enjoyed this book and they're going to enjoy your next book, but I'm curious to connect the dots to what brought you to being a writer and a business expert in this particular niche.
Yeah, I've been through a couple of exits myself, and I think I learned, I craved, they say you scratch your own itch. I craved more information. I felt like everywhere I turned, somebody had their hand out. When I went to sell my last company, I had a coach who seemed to be pretty cozy with an M&A professional. The M&A professional had, commissions that they were going to make from the deal. My banker didn't know much about it. My accountant knew nothing about selling a company. And so I just felt, and I couldn't tell my employees, I couldn't ask anybody. I just felt very alone in the process. Yet I was very confused by the whole process itself, all the terminology. And so I just thought, I sold my last company. I was in a position where I didn't need to necessarily work right away. And I thought, you know what, maybe I'll write down some of this stuff and it'll help a few people. And that was the genesis behind Built to Sell. And it's gone on to kind of create a whole momentum of its own. I think it's been translated in like 13 languages or something like that, which I still find crazy. But yeah, it was really scratching my own itch, feeling like that we needed more information out there about the stage of our careers, as opposed to, there's a whole bunch of information. How do you start a business? How do you grow a business? Right. I was really more focused on how do you exit it.
I think your writing style, I don't know if you're a trained writer, I'm not sure. Your writing style of telling that story in the book about the business owner who was me. Like that guy was me, and I had built a big business. I had 600 agents and brokers, and it was, by anyone's observation, be what they call it successful, but I was unhappy. I had no free time. I was living a toxic lifestyle. I had no systems. If I didn't show up to work, I didn't get paid. And so how did you decide to write that story and how to frame it like that rather than just rattle off step 1 through 10?
Yeah, the story. Well, thanks for sharing that. And I'm glad that you were able to kind of pull yourself out of that quagmire. It sounds very common where on the surface businesses seem successful, but like the duck sort of paddling their feet underneath the water. You don't know how fast you're moving your feet to try to keep up. And I think a lot of business owners feel that way, and especially ones where it's a service business where clients are oftentimes sort of very demanding and everyone wants a custom solution, et cetera. And so, as I mentioned, I've been involved in 4 different companies, one of which was actually an advertising and marketing agency, which is the story in the book. So, there's autobiographical parts of that book sort of woven in, along with lots of stories and lots of just observing other business owners. We used to do, my last company was a quantitative market research business where we surveyed small business owners, and we provided that data back to subscribers who were usually large enterprise companies like banks and credit card companies. And so we were getting to the point where we were surveying 10,000 business owners every single year. So I sort of had a sense of how business owners were feeling. And a lot of them felt kind of trapped by their business. They started with this notion of, well, like starting a business is going to make me free, and I'm going to be financially free, and I'm going to be able to live wherever I want, do whatever I want. And then quickly they get into running the company, and it becomes like an albatross around their neck. Like they can't, like you said, nothing happened unless you were there. Right. And that's a frustration.
And how did that bring about this new project? The art of selling a business. It's just the next logical step, it seems.
Well, I think so. So Built to Sell is about how do you build a valuable company. The Automatic Customer, which is a book I wrote in 2015, is about how do you accelerate the value of that business through recurring revenue. And then the art of selling your business is really about how do you harvest the value you've created. So it's one thing to think you've got a valuable business on paper. Mm-hmm. It's quite another to harvest. It's funny. I just did a podcast. I do a thing called Built to Sell Radio where I interview different entrepreneurs every day, every week at least. And one of them I did yesterday is a guy who started a business called Sales Benchmark Index. And talking about harvesting and valuation, he had built the company, and from the very beginning, he put an estimate of value on his business of 1.25 times revenue. So just a little more than 1 times revenue. And that was sort of how we went about thinking about the business. He brought partners in and shared equity with them based on that valuation formula. And he'd sort of done that for a period of 11 years. Well, he told me the story yesterday where he went to go sell the business, and he kind of had in his mind sort of 1.2 times revenue. He sold his $30 million consulting company for $162 million. Oh, wow. So what is that? Like 5-6 times top line revenue? It completely was like mind blowing for him, the value that he was able to get for this business. And it just showed him that even though he built a really successful company, $30 million in revenue, like a really, really successful business, he didn't know much about what it was worth to someone else. And so there's just, I think, a tremendous gap in knowledge about how do you sort of structure a business to maximize its value. So that was the impetus behind the new book, is how do you harvest all this value you've created on paper?
Yeah, because there's the art and the science of that calculation. I mean, the art is, I would imagine, it's only worth what someone wants to pay for it, and the science, I'm sure, is justifying that value at some level.
You're right. There's a story in the book. A guy named Jeff Feldberg built a company called MBNet, and they were doing websites for universities, right? In the beginning, it was just web design, and they started putting online courses, the university's content, into an online course, and they got an offer to acquire their business, and it was for around 3 times profit. And Feldberg and his partner Steve Wells said, "Yeah, it's kind of an average multiple. I'm not sure we want to do it, and we'd really like to get a better price for our company." How do we do that? Well, they made some changes to the business model, but they also made a change to the way they talked about what they do. And this comes down to the art of selling your company. They went from saying they're a graphic design shop, and acquirers have a sort of valuation for graphic design shops as a service business. It's not very high. They talked about and went from referring to themselves as a graphic design shop, and they started referring to themselves as leaders in the burgeoning e-learning category, right? E-learning at the time, like Linda had just been acquired by LinkedIn, and LinkedIn itself had just been acquired by Microsoft. It was a big, big consolidation in the e-learning industry. And because they were putting these courses for universities online, they could say, well, yeah, we're kind of one of the market leaders in e-learning. Well, long story short, 2.5 years after they declined an offer of 3 times EBITDA for their company, they accepted an offer of 13 times EBITDA, in part because it's the way they were positioning their business. That's what I mean by the art versus the science of selling.
Of course, yeah. I mean, we teach selling in the outcome versus selling the hours and the effort and the time. I mean, people pay for the outcome. That's Absolutely awesome. Right. Tell me. I've gotten this a lot too. Post-pandemic, I mean, you had pandemic, and it seems like we're coming out of it. Tell me what the post-pandemic business market is like? People buying and selling businesses. Anything's changing? Opportunities,
Yeah, I
threats?
mean, a couple things. We've just looked at the data out of our so my day job, I run a software company called Value Builder, and we have business owners use our questionnaire. We've had something like 10,000 of them complete the Value Builder questionnaire over the last 16 months. And so we decided to compare and contrast the data from people who completed the intake questionnaire prior to the announcement of the COVID pandemic, and then the 9 months during the pandemic. And we're still in it, obviously, but we decided to kind of analyze the data and kind of compare and contrast. Two things popped to mind. One is that business owners have moved up their sell-by date by about 20%. So in other words, they're planning to sell about 20% sooner. The second thing that popped when we analyzed the data was that the proportion of business owners who now plan to sell their business to a third party rather than give it to their kids or do a management transition has gone up. So now sell to a third party is like 60% of the business owners in the market, and do a family transition is down around 12%. So we're seeing business owners really want to sell to a third party and not transition to their kids, and they want to do it sooner. And then kind of adding sort of jet fuel to this, of course, is the interest rates being so low that allows acquirers to finance these businesses. And then you add in the SBA, who in the United States at least has started to, finance in a much more aggressive way the sale of these businesses. And so it's just created this confluence of factors that I think is making a very, very active M&A market right now. Lots of businesses selling.
I had a call last night with my brother, who owns a small insurance agency. It's not very small. It's a good size for he's the biggest agency in a little town. So he's got a nice business, and during the pandemic, he had an older, more mature field force, so they weren't necessarily ready for the online grind or even functional. And he took a call from he and his partner, I think, were looking at selling potentially, and they took a call on the wrong day or the right day, no matter how you look at it. And he was worried on whether or not to even admit to the guy who called, who was a major player in a bigger city down the street, that he was interested. So how does a business owner, I said, Tim, you either, it's a risky conversation to let someone know you're for sale. Like, how do you navigate through that thought that, hey, I think I might want to sell my business, but I may not want the market to know I have, or my employees to know that I'm interested in doing that?
Yeah, for sure. Look, there's nothing that precludes you from having a conversation with an industry peer, right? So that is a very common approach by an acquirer wanting to have a one-on-one sort of relationship with an owner. The problem with that is that it effectively is how a sophisticated acquirer will lure you into something called a prop deal. And a prop deal is where the acquirer negotiates just with you. And the problem with that is that it's a recipe for making sure that the acquirer provides the lowest possible valuation for your company, and often retrades on that after signing a letter of intent, meaning they lower their price because they know they're the only game in town, and your brother has gotten sort of suckered into this or lured into this. So I'd much rather see him, if he did want to sell his brokerage, to really be proactive and put it on the market, hire an M&A professional to kind of market it to multiple buyers. And that way, even if you were to sell to the same person who approaches him, he's going to get better deal terms, probably a higher valuation. And so that's the difference between being on your front foot and being on your back foot. That being said, look, I don't think, there's nothing that would preclude Tim from having a conversation with that acquirer. I would just go to that conversation loaded with questions for that acquirer so that you could dominate the conversation so that you don't have to give a lot of information away. Because information in a sale of a business is a little bit like clothing in a striptease. You want to make sure it comes off slowly. And so in that case, I would want Tim to make sure he was not the one providing a lot of information. In fact, he was asking questions of the acquirer, like, what do you see as the strategic fit between our companies? What do you think the future would look like? How does our industry play out for you in the next 5 years? Like really peppering him with questions.
So that leads me to timing, when the right time is for him. Because I think, as we go post-pandemic, the world's going to change, but not back to the way it was. I think a lot of companies made a breakthrough on the possibility of closing, physical spaces and doing more virtual stuff. But like, let's pretend he doesn't want to make the adjustment. You have the timing. When does he do it? Because he may, what I think was exposed is he doesn't have the systems that are in your first book to get the value that he wants, or the service models, which we're talking about tonight. And then what tricks or what mistakes? I mean, he doesn't want to make a mistake. I don't want to make mistakes. Like, what are mistakes are people making?
Yeah, look, I think, the question around timing is an interesting one, because as I mentioned, that the landscape, the macroeconomic environment right now is really good to sell a company. And the other thing I would say that in my experience, a lot of owners that I speak with really want to time the sale of their company, right? They're like, they want to time it when the market peaks for their business. They're on a winning streak. The macroeconomic environment is good. They want to kind of have all those things coalesce and then sell their company. What I usually mention to them is, like, first of all, nobody's that good at being able to predict, when those three things are all going to happen. Secondly, the best time to sell your company is when somebody's buying it. It's when somebody's making you an offer, you're on your, you don't have to grovel at their knee and ask them to buy your business. They're coming to you, in which case you've got negotiating leverage. I'm reminded of a guy that's in the book and someone I interviewed called Rand Fishkin. So Rand had a little software company called SEO Moz, built it up to about $5 million in revenue. And in his mind, his was a SaaS company, a software as a service business, which, as you know, has like really high valuations. And so he had been told that it was could be worth as much as 4 times top line revenue. Now, Rand was growing very quickly at this time. So he figured, well, he's at 5 million now. He figured he could get to 10 the next year. And so in his mind, his company was worth maybe as much as $40 million. He gets a call from a guy named Brian Halligan. Halligan is the co-founder of HubSpot, one of those all-in-one marketing software. And Halligan says to Fishkin, look, we want to buy your company. We're willing to spend $25 million in cash and HubSpot stock. That's a lot of money. And Fishkin is looking at this and saying, well, I want 40, that's kind of more my number. And Halligan says, like, my final number is 25. It's still 5 times your top line revenue. Like, it's a fair offer. And Fishkin says, no, I'm not going to take it, and goes away and instead raises venture capital, takes the VC money and invests in a bunch of different businesses. Unfortunately, the businesses, most of which fail to meet his expectations, he starts to spiral into a period of depression. And so much so that the VCs remove him as the CEO. And I asked Fishkin, how did that impact the value of your Moz shares? And he said, well, they're probably not worth anything anymore. And I said, what do you mean they're not worth anything? He said, well, the VCs invested with preferred shares, and so they're going to get a preferred return before I get anything. And I said, what would that offer from HubSpot have been worth? And he said, well, it's probably close to $200 million based on the appreciation of HubSpot stock. Right. And I tell that story, and I would encourage you to tell Tim that story, because, the best time to sell your business is when someone's buying. And I still would definitely create competitive tension, try to get multiple bidders at the table. But if you get a bidder, take that seriously, because there's no better time.
What's your experience been? I mean, you got people coming to you for this topic of a business owner saying, look, I've had enough, I want out, and just telling their employees, like, bear with me, I'll make sure you're treated well. Like, what's the strategy there? I think and the dynamic as it relates to the new book, what role the employees play in the value and the continuity. post
Yeah.
employer or post owner?
Yeah, it's there's a few things you want to keep confidential when you go to sell your company, and telling your employees, unfortunately, is one of those areas where the right answer, the morally correct answer, is not the strategically sound answer. Morally, you want to tell your employees, right? They're the ones who brought you this far. You wouldn't be where you are without them. They're friends or family members in many cases. The last thing you want to do is have this mega secret.
Right.
However, you just really, you can't tell them, because the moment you tell them is the moment they start brushing up their LinkedIn profile. They start taking their industry knowledge and shopping their experience to your competitors. Your competitors find out. And unfortunately, you undermine your negotiating leverage when your employees know you're for sale. The other thing that you do not want to do is let an acquirer talk to your employees. There's a story in the book where a private equity group targeted a specific industry, and they used the veil of an acquisition in order to cherry pick and recruit employees. So they said, "Oh, we're thinking of buying a business in your industry." And they put together an IOI, an indication of interest, where they said, like, we'd like to buy your business, and we'd like to spend X amount of money on buying it. And of course, that lit the owner's eyes on fire, and they thought, "Oh, this is fantastic. I'd love to have the conversation." They then proceeded to interview the management team of all these companies they were speaking with, and they actually spoke to 80 different management teams. They made 2 offers. Those deals closed. This other 78 companies were where they fished for employees. So they went out and stole employees from the 78 companies who they'd interviewed, because they didn't sign an NDA. They didn't sign anything that would preclude them from doing that. And it was all because the owner had sort of been romanced into believing that they were going to be acquired. And so it's, the way and how you tell your employees is a critical component to getting this right.
I can see why you call it an art. Sometimes not, right? That's what art is. Art's a combination of wisdom and science to create art. It's not exact. How do people get a hold of you?
The best place to go is builttosell.com. If any of these stories, like Rand's story and others, are interesting, we do a new case study every week of an owner who has sold their company. And so if you opt in, i.e. like you provide your email address, we'll send you free each episode. So that's probably the best place to find me. Builttosell.com.
Do you do any training for business owners or advisors to business owners on your trilogy, on your 3 books? Do you train them direct other than the books?
Yeah, I mentioned in the beginning, my day job is I run this company called Value Builder, and we license that to advisors who want to help business owners improve the value of their company leading up to an exit. So we have a lot of financial advisors, a lot of business consultants who use the Value Builder system as a way to start a conversation with a business owner about the value of their company. So yeah, folks interested in that, it's just valuebuilder.com.
Oh, nice. I took the Certified Family Business Specialist course.
Okay, great.
At the American College. And there was one on business valuation. And at the time, I was going through a divorce. So I see all the complexities of valuing a business is art and science as well, right? But I found out that there's there's a value if you're going to sell it and you want all the money, and there's another value that you're going to tell the courts if you're getting divorced. It was
slightly different numbers.
Yeah, it's a funny thing. Hey, I got to tell you, thank you for the work you do. Indirectly and directly, you save lives. You help people transform. And you want to get a copy of this book, and there's going to be links in the notes on how to get a hold of John, his courses, his social media, and website. So thank you, John.
Terrance, it was a pleasure.